really happy to have Rebecca here with us today. I found out about Rebecca's work through the BC Achievement Foundation's Polygon First Nation Art Awards that I had the privilege of attending, and was just blown away by her work, the detail, the skill, the craftsmanship, and the innovation that she exhibited in her practice. And of course, it felt like a natural fit for the work that we do here and bringing her to share her practice and her ideas with us. So before we get started, I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about her practice, and then we can kind of launch into the meat of it. So Rebecca is Kwakiuł. Sorry, I was going to practice this with you before sitting down. Dzawada'enuwx and Sḳwx is a multidisciplinary artist with a BA from the University of British Columbia, a major in the Indigenous Studies program. Rebecca began fashion design in 2021, apprenticing under Pam Baker. She also completed the Indigenous Couture residency at the Banff Centre of the Arts in 2022. Rebecca represents her cultural identity within a contemporary artistic medium with the aim of empowering Indigenous people and strengthening the art form. Rebecca debuted her first collection at New York Fashion Week in 2022. She has since shown her collection at SWAIA Fashion Show, Santa Fe Indian Market, Vancouver Fashion Week, Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week, and Indigenous Fashion Arts Toronto. Rebecca's work has been exhibited at the American Museum for Natural History in New York, the Reid Gallery, Museum of Vancouver, and the YVR Vancouver Airport. She was the recipient of the 2025 Polygon Award in First Nations Art, presented by the BC Achievement Foundation, and the 2021 YVR Emerging Artist Award. Rebecca was featured in the October 2024 issue of Elle Canada. There's an intimate ancestral connection with the art that Rebecca creates, representing her lineage as an Indigenous woman. Rebecca has been creating her personal and family sewn and beaded powwow regalia since the age of 11. She is the regalia designer for the dancers of Dzawada'enuwx, thank you, productions, 2016 to present, with her works dancing on national and international stages. So please, let's all welcome Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you. As you heard in our bio intro, Rebecca began making regalia at age 11, and I assume you probably had exposure to this well before that. You began making regalia for yourself and your family quite young. Can you take us back to that moment and maybe explain a little bit to us about what making meant to you at that time?
Mm-hmm. I was raised by my mother, who was part of the Sćwx, and when my sister and I were born, she wanted to reconnect with culture. And one of the ways in which she did that was through powwows. And I started dancing when I was about 11 years old, and she made me my first dress and my first shawl, and then from there on, I just completely fell in love with it. Growing up, she was always very crafty. She went to a lot of the markets for sale, and I just remember playing in her sewing room, watching her. We always kind of joked that I would fall asleep in her Rubbermaid bins under her tables at the markets. And I think being immersed in it and seeing the joy that it brought her and the strength that it brought to her, I didn't really consciously make the effort to want to sew, I don't think. I think when you're immersed in something, it becomes natural. So when I did start to dance, I wanted to make my own regalias, and I wanted, this color, and my mom being a single mom, she's like, okay, well, why don't you do it? And she taught me how to use the sewing machine, and from there on, I just fell in love with it. My sister and I and her, we would spend the weekends or evenings just in the sewing room making regalia. And once I realized that there's a freedom to it, I really fell in love more, that I could experiment with different colors, with different shapes, with different designs. And that's not really something that I thought about strongly as being in the art world. And I think when I started fashion, I had a really, really hard time identifying as an artist, because in our culture, there's no word for art. What you see, the masks, the paintings, the totem poles, our regalia, our blankets, those aren't really seen as art to us. That is just part of who we are. That is our regalia. Those are our sacred belongings. So that concept of artist didn't really land with me growing up. For me, it was just part of who I was. It's just what I did. It's just who we were. And I think there is a certain privilege to that. But I think, growing up making regalia, I found a strong pride in that. I think when I got into my teenage years, it really kept me healthy and away from a lot of the influences that a lot of our young people do experience, because we created a community and a family that we would get together and order pizza on Friday nights, and we would stay home and we would sew, we would bead, we would watch endless runs of whatever TV show it was, and that was what was exciting to us. And then we would travel all summer long to Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and into the States attending powwows. And I think that's something that I really try to encourage families to do more of, is to just really immerse yourselves in culture or whatever it is that families might love, because the influence on youth is far beyond what we can imagine.
Well, that must have been so empowering to have this sort of outlet at that time and be good at it, be recognized for it, and be able to contribute to your community in that way, and also kind of find your people at that time.
I think looking back on it, I find it kind of weird, because people would approach me at 16 and be like, hey, can you make my kid a regalia? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. But looking back on it, I'm like, I was only 16. But it was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate having that upbringing.
I mean, I think we see that with art here. It's so important to give young people that outlet, to have that community around it. So you studied Indigenous studies at UBC and later moved into fashion through apprenticeship and residency. How did these different forms, these kind of very formal, more informal, more community-based and not, how did those different forms of education shape your path as a designer?
I think when I went into university, I had no idea that I would ever become an artist. I didn't grow up saying, oh, I want to do fashion one day, I want to be an artist one day. Kind of that concept of like not identifying as an artist. I went to school wanting to do either like education or law. Those were the areas that really excited me. And then I had my first kid right after I graduated, and my husband and I, we decided that we were able for me to stay home with him, so I didn't really pursue a career at that time, and it enabled me the time to create more. And I took on my first kind of big commission with the Dancers of Da Muhammad as the regalia designer for their production Minowin and Raven Mother. And it was through that I realized I have something in me that I wanted to express that couldn't be done within the boundaries of regalia, because regalia requires like the certain uses of colors and materials and designs, whereas fashion was this whole nother world that I could create whatever shapes, whatever colors, and tell whatever stories that I wanted to tell. And it was the relationship between my education at UBC and my art career, I think, is so intertwined, because the formal education enabled me to think, to really open up my mind about our Indigenous history within Canada and more globally, and how does that relate to my identity, to our identity as Indigenous people, and how can I communicate that with everybody else. And I think one thing that it really brought to me was the thought to ask questions, to question, well, what is being told? What is the narrative? What are these stereotypes? And even though I experienced all of these things growing up, I didn't know how to put words to them. So I think that is one of the major things that my education allowed me, and how they kind of relate together.
That's really interesting. Do you feel like your practice is able to kind of continue grappling with those things?
Absolutely. I think it is something so special about fashion is that it's an accessible art form to people, that everybody has a relationship with fashion. Whether you want to admit it or not, or whether you think you're trendy or not, everybody has a relationship to fashion. And it is something that everybody can attend, whether it's a runway or an exhibit, a talk. It's not the same as one of our ceremonies that are a bit more held close to our communities. And it is through fashion that we have the ability to tell stories. We can share the challenges that we face as Indigenous people. We can share our cultural narratives if we want to. And I think it is through those conversations of fashion and the audience that we begin this cross-cultural understanding of our histories. And I think a lot of those conversations of colonialism, of assimilation, of the impacts of the potlatch ban, like everything that has impacted us and continues to impact us, I learned deeply through my education at UBC, and they really resonate, and being able to translate that into my fashion, I think, is what I find great meaning in, and encourage people, if you buy a shirt with a design on it, learn who the artist is, what the history is, because you might be walking down the street one day and somebody might comment, "I love your shirt," and then that's the opportunity for that conversation and that education. And I think when we all learn about each other, it really strengthens our community and our society as a whole.
Yeah, well, fashion is such an interesting place to have these kind of overlapping cultural influences too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like line of production, all of these kind of aspects of how it goes from being conceived to sitting in our closets is like, it's a global process.
Mm-hmm.
And in your terms, though, it's often a very micro, local process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know it wasn't in the early questions I gave you, but can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I don't work with manufacturers. That is something I have thought about, but I think for me as an artist, I don't really see myself as like a brand so much. I think I create work that is meaningful to me, that I want to make, and hopefully it resonates with somebody. Sometimes they're wearable to a certain extent, but they're more of an art piece that, sometimes I have beadwork that you can't really sit in, or I have a piece that's like made out of cedar chips that you can't really wear that out. But, and I think that kind of looks to addressing sustainability. The fast fashion world, I think most people have heard the discussions right now that it is one of the leading impacts on our waste. The amount of fashion waste that there is just absolutely disgusting. And even if we think that, I recently did an exhibit at the Squamish-Lil'wat Cultural Center, and we made a waterfall out of clothes, and we went to the local thrift store and we said, "Can you give us anything that's blue or white that cannot be resold, whether it's stained or ripped or whatever?" And within, I think, 2 weeks, we had like maybe 4 or 5 garbage bags. And that's only within Whistler at this one little thrift store. Wow. And I was like, that's really gross, like how much garbage there is. And even if we think we're donating it or we think that we can repurpose it, I think the amount that we buy just isn't sustainable for our earth. And I think being a small-scale artist, creating pieces that will be heirloom pieces that can be passed on to kids, I think that is, for me, where I find meaning. Like this coat, it's, a one-of-a-kind coat, and I hope to pass it on to my daughter, for example. And I think when we love the pieces that we own, and we're okay with wearing something that's a little bit stained or a little bit ripped, or, with this one, if there got a little rip in it, I'd fix it up and continue to wear it. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, mending is a skill I think a lot of us have lost.
Yeah.
But, yeah, very, very important thing to remember. So your work is grounded in regalia making, but also exists within contemporary fashion. I think that's what makes it so interesting and vibrant, and, I think draws so many people to what you're doing. Can you describe your practice in that sense, like how that overlap happens, where your inspiration comes, and those kind of things in terms of your practice?
Mm-hmm. For me, regalia is essentially what we wear in ceremony or in dance, and it is a tangible representation of who we are as Indigenous people. It tells our stories that we have rights to within our lineages, and the colors are specific to what our ancestors would have used years ago through natural dyeing techniques. And the techniques of sewing and the materials used, they connect us with our ancestors, and it's a practice that has lived for generations and generations. And I think those values are what I hope to kind of translate into fashion, looking at how we can use similar materials, whether it's wool or beads or buttons or even yarn, how we can use our traditional colors. But in fashion, how can we innovate it? How can we push the art form forward? And our art is so particular, and one of my teachers, David Boxley, he says that in formline art, even the width of your pencil mark can be the difference between a perfect ovoid and not a perfect ovoid. And I think that concept of just really trying to master the art, it's a lifelong process that we can spend our whole life doing and we might not achieve, but that effort that we put into it is what matters the most. And I think fashion allows that flexibility to really look at our materials, our designs, and try to do something new with them that hasn't previously been done. And I think that relationship is sometimes tricky because I also try to be respectful of what is appropriate and what might be not appropriate. So trying to use designs that aren't necessarily a crest as much. Like on here, their salmon head ovoids, which isn't a specific crest, and it's done in a way that's a bit more, I guess, contemporary. So it's not as specific so that anybody can wear it. And yeah.
That's so interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about how crests are typically used in Indigenous kind of cultural representation?
Yeah, so within our stories, we have our origin stories of where we come from, and depending on what family you are, you belong to specific houses and specific lineages, and those afford you rights to use specific crests. And those crests represent origin stories or stories, supernatural beings. And most often you see raven, eagle, wolf, whale, and it is through your connections of who your family is that you're allowed to wear that, and it connects you within the wider community.
Cool. Do you have particular ones that you're connected with then?
Yeah, so the double-headed raven, my late grandpa is Chief Tony Hunt Sr. He is a very prolific artist through the Hunt family, through the Kwakiuł side, and then, so that was one of the ravens, and then there was a marriage through Anislaga, who is also, she was Tlingit, who brought the rights of the chilkat blanket to our communities, and it was the two crests coming together that formed the double-headed raven. So that's one of the most kind of prominent ones, but there's also, the sun or the bear, the Sksz'yuth. There's all kinds of different crests that come from my family. Mm-hmm.
So amazing. Can you walk us through a piece or a collection and share what goes into it conceptually and materially?
Yeah, so this is where I wanted to bring in some pictures. If we could go back to the first slide, which was this one. So I wanted to start with this one because it kind of traveled through my whole fashion career. I say my whole fashion career as if it's been a long time. It's only been a couple years. The beadwork on the bottom of it, that started as just, it was a belt. And I showed that one at my very first runway show, which it actually wasn't New York. I did a very, very small, I only showed, I think, 2 or 3 looks at the Chief Joe Matthias Community Center on the Capilano Reserve. And then it transformed, I did the back of it, and then it was a full belt, and then I turned it into a vest, which is here in the Natural History Museum in New York. And this piece is now one of my regalia pieces for when I dance. And this one is chilkat design, but the colors are not traditional. They are colors that you wouldn't typically see on our chilkat blankets. Traditionally, chilkat is used with, made with mountain goat wool and cedar bark, and it would be dyed with different natural materials to create our robes, aprons, and then the top part is all dentalium shells. And I think bringing in the different materials and blending them together, using different colors, I think, but still having it in the world of what can kind of be maybe traditional regalia. I think that's kind of where my work typically lands. This one I called Held by Generations. The concept that when you wear it, there's a certain weight to it that just feels like you're being held, that you're safe. And I always feel my best when I'm wearing my regalia. I always feel my proudest and my safest. And it's almost like that armor that you carry. And then the rose of the dentalium is meant to represent the generations before us. And then the apron is leather. This one is called Wazulis. It was a commission for the YVR Vancouver Airport. And in my community, the Kwakiuł community in Sţwx, or Fort Rupert, which is kind of north of Vancouver Island near Port Hardy, there's a little island called Deer Island just off of the main reserve area. And they were gonna log that island for the old growth trees. And it was, my grandpa was one of the people involved in the court case, but they fought and they said, no, this is our traditional burial grounds. This is where we harvest our food. This is where we gather our cedar bark for our ceremonies. And this is where, like, it is a place of cultural wealth. And they fought the logging companies and the governments and said, no, this is our land, we are not gonna log it. And they ended up winning, so it wasn't logged. So you can see the cedar trees, and then that is a Sksz'yuth head, which is the double-headed serpent. And the bottom part, if you were to lay the vest flat, the bottom is the shape of the beach, of the shoreline. This one has the cedar bark ropes, the center of the trees, and it's tied down the side with cedar bark ropes. And that was to represent our connection with our origin. During the Great Floods, we tied our canoes to the tops of the mountain so that they wouldn't float away, and with our cedar bark ropes. This was my second collection called We Are Warriors, and it's meant to represent the strength of who we are as Indigenous people and to pay tribute to all that our parents, our grandparents, and all of our generations have done to maintain, to strengthen, and to revitalize our cultures so that we have access to them today. And it was actually inspired by my trip to the museum, the Natural History Museum in New York, because they have a lot of really incredible warrior armor that I just thought was absolutely stunning. The picture on your left is it's a carved copper bodice in collaboration with Agnes seaweed, and you can't see it in this photo, but there's engravings on it. So the front side is a representation of a dancer on her beach dancing, and that represents when we go back home. The bodice itself is called Coming Home, so returning to our communities, returning to our cultures. And I think I always thought about my mom being part of the Sksz's Scoop to make that trip home, to connect with family, and the difficulties and the complexities that we face in doing so, but also the strength that it takes to do that. And then the back side of the bodice represents ancestral warriors coming home from war. So with this collection, I played a lot with hard and soft materials, so copper, thinking of it as armor. The middle picture, that is also a copper kind of interpretation of armor. And then this one is wood engraved with abalone to become her skirt. This is my recent collection, Our Roots Run Deep, which looks at the relationship between our waterways and our forest systems and the impact of colonial forces on those and our cultural relationships to our forests and our waterways. I have a poem that I wrote that inspired this collection. A love letter to cedar. Cedar, our tree of life, I am of you. You are the bones that are the structure of this sacred house, this body. You are the vessel that connects me to the water and the paddles that move me. The weaving, weft, and warp wrapped around me, branches holding me, seedlings and ashes, my ancestor, my relative, my breath. I will return to you. We will grow again. Tomorrow, in memory of river. I come to the river, but there is no water. I stare out, reflecting what once was, a lifeline, the veins that fueled the earth, interconnected, all abundance, our essence. You were more than we knew. I mourn you, my sister. My tears keep flowing. I imagine them bringing you back to life, replenishing what we took of you, but it is too late. You are gone. Today, what will you do? So those really inspired this collection to look at our impacts on the world, what it means to be part of the world, what it means to take from the earth, but what it means to give back, and challenging the idea that we need to do something, and what is it that we will do. And these are pictures from Santa Fe, from Native Fashion Week. And this one is one that I meant that you can't actually sit in it. They are bone beads, so typically you see a lot of the bone beads on like chokers or lanyards, and they're beaded in almost like a pyramid style, so they stick up with the rhinestones. I imagine it, I think I was just having fun trying new techniques, But when it came together, it reminded me of a waterfall when it rushes over the cliff and disperses into mist at the bottom. So this one I called From What Was Left. My brother, Colton Grant, he is one of our carvers in our family, and these are the cedar shavings from when he carves and they fall. I asked him if he could collect them for me, so they're picked up off his studio floor and made into a bodice. And then that was a photo shoot that we did on the Chief, the mountain. And I think the relationship to land is something that has been a through point in my work, because all that we are comes from the land, all of our stories. And one day we will return to the land, and I hope that the work that I do as an artist has as little impact on our earth as possible.
Wow. That's beautiful. Just such really incredible work. Thanks for taking us through that.
Thank you.
The piece with the pyramid beading is so outstanding.
Thank you.
I think like that was, it might have been the thing that initially grabbed me when I was seeing your work for the first time. And, I remember seeing it in one of the videos that was presented alongside your award and seeing it almost like, well, I mean, it's a video, so it's technically 2D, but it's bringing it to life, seeing the movement of it and everything. And that leads me to my next question, actually. How your work is often seen in motion through dance and performance. How does designing for movement shape how you think about clothing?
My mentor, when I was sending her my sketches when I was very first starting, she says, okay, but how are you going to get into this? And I thought, oh yeah, okay, where's the zipper going to go? I thought it was so good. But it is something to consider, and there's actually like a viral video, or it's like an audio on Instagram right now, and it's like, fashion's the greatest art form. It's architecture and movement and something. And at first I kind of giggled, and I was like, well, it is actually quite remarkable, because it is all of those things. It's architecture, it's structure, it's movement, it's flow, it's design, it's technique. Like it's
also like math and science and production. It's everything.
It's like it's everything, and it is very remarkable to think that I think you can think of fashion as like, you know, a t-shirt, but I think the way that I think of fashion is as an art, and to think of, okay, how can I translate my art onto something that is wearable? How is it going to move? How is the design that looks great on a picture, but when worn and the dress falls flat, how is that going to look? And I think that relationship with a human body and with art is just something that is really, really interesting to me. But yeah, I don't know.
Nicely put. As we know from all of the wonderful attention your work's been getting, featured in Elle magazine, things like that, more kind of traditional, like Eurocentric fashion outlets, Indigenous fashion is gaining more visibility right now. So what do you feel that people still might misunderstand about it?
I think there's a lot of conversations that can happen with this. I think, well, this isn't really the question, but for me, there is a lot of what people might see as glamour, or things like, you know, the magazine or the awards, and those are really special and incredible moments. But for me, what is most important is what I can bring to our culture, to our communities. And I call her my Otta. She is raised like a grandma. And she made it out to one of my fashion weeks in Vancouver. And she was just so happy and so proud. And to have our matriarch just so happy for me. I think it's those moments that really mean the most to me, because it's not about making the most, I don't know, glamorous thing to be in a magazine or something. It's about telling our stories of who we are as Indigenous people, to tell the stories of our family, to tell our histories, our current realities. And yeah, what was the question?
Well, just, I think you answered it well, but yeah, is there anything
okay.
people are misunderstanding?
I think the conversation around appropriation is a huge one in fashion right now. I think there is so much beauty within everybody's culture or within everybody's stories, their personal experiences, that they don't need to be looking to other people's culture to take and use as their own. That I think there's so much inspiration in the world that we don't need to use designs that are so sacred to us. And that's something that I wish people, like a lot of the designers or the fast fashion, is pulling from Indigenous culture, which kind of leads into this kind of question of appreciation versus appropriation. And I always encourage people to support our artists, that if an artist is selling a t-shirt with a native design on it, that you are probably most likely totally okay to wear and actually encouraged to wear. Because like I said, that opens up conversation of learning, of understanding, and of strengthening our relationships to each other. And even jewelry that you might see at an art gallery, you know, if you have the means to buy it, I always really encourage it to appreciate our art for really what it is. And something else I think about with society's perception of Indigenous art or fashion, I think it's often seen as like crafty. Some of our designers are just absolutely incredible designers that should be in the same spaces as mainstream designers, mainstream art. And as with, you know, any of our art, whether it's masks or poles, carvings, paintings, they deserve space in all of, you know, gallery spaces, runways, art shows, because our art is rooted in generations and generations of training, and there is just some absolutely incredible people out there doing amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about the way that, you know, meaning is built over time, and this sort of, you know, like one artist sort of moves something forward, the next artist responds to it and kind of maybe undoes that or moves it forward again. And that process sort of, you know, having been happening for millennia, instead of, you know, the kind of European model of fashion where, you know, we do look at the last 200 years, but it's so much smaller, it's so much less rooted in these kind of, in meaning and these greater stories. And it's fascinating to think about this fashion as both a tool and an expression as well.
And I think, like, when you look at the huge fashion houses, you always see them with like hundreds of seamstresses, but our work is essentially the same, just on a smaller scale. And we've always been like the original couturiers of this land. All that we've done has always been handmade. It's always like really long, time-consuming projects.
Made to measure.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's, yeah, just bringing, I guess, light to that. Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Can you speak a little bit about the role of making with your own hands and the broader community of makers and knowledge that has supported that work? So, you know, some mentorship and what learning those skills has meant through your career?
You know, like I said, I learned from watching my mom and a lot of trial and error, trying something, and I'm like, wow, it's really weird. And I think coming into fashion, working with my auntie Pam Baker, who is also just an absolutely incredible designer, one of the OGs in Indigenous fashion, she really challenged me to think outside the box, and I would present her with sketches, and she's like, I've seen that before. She's like, that's a little bit
useful.
safe. Yeah. And she called my work safe, like some of the pictures, and I was like so offended. And I was like, oh my goodness, really? You've seen that before? And the more I got like immersed in fashion, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I see it. But those things are what really push my work forward, and without being challenged in those ways, and it was done so in such a loving way, I wouldn't be the designer that I am today. I wouldn't be the artist that I am today. And I think working, being inspired by people, but also that concept of training is really ingrained in our culture. It was always relationships that you had with your aunties, with your grandmas, to be trained in certain aspects of our culture, whether it be dance or song or regalia-making, even, carving, or a lot of times it happens from such a young age, and you're trained from a young age up until adulthood, in which case then you would pass it on to the next generation. And that's how we keep our culture moving forward and maintained and strengthened.
You're a mother. You told us about how motherhood was very much on the heels of your education. So can you tell me how motherhood has shaped your creative life, if it has?
I think it has. It's the motivation for why I do what I do, and I think this is something that I can't stress enough, and I've said already, but all that we do is for the next generation. Learning the techniques, even if it is in this contemporary art form of fashion, it still relates to regalia, and learning, it is through fashion that I've learned and connected in a lot of different ways to my culture. And I think it is so important to learn those things so that I can then pass them on to my kids, to my nieces and nephews. And I think something really exciting that I'm seeing in Indigenous fashion is the excitement from the youth. Youth are so excited to come to fashion shows, to model, and to be inspired. And because it is so accessible, it's exciting. There's, good music, and you get to dress up. And it's a safe place for them to come and experience culture in a way that they feel comfortable doing so. Sometimes there's a lot of pressures around, learning language or learning our ceremonies. Sometimes when you're disconnected, or if you're raised away from community, there's a lot of complexities around doing so, but I think fashion provides, it kind of fills a gap for people to learn about. So I think, everything that I do is to pass on to my kids. And at the beginning of this, I talked about how I grew up in my mom's sewing room, playing with her fabrics and laying under her table. And there was a point when I was sewing and my kids were in my sewing room, and I was like, that used to be me. It makes me emotional every time I think about it. Because now they play in my sewing room, and now, we make pillowcases together. Or my daughter, she was asked what she wants to be when she grows up, and she said a fashion designer. And that just warmed my heart so much, because right now she's only 6. And she gets excited to pick out fabrics at the fabric store and make little things for her dolls, even though that usually means I'm making them. but I think it is that little glimmer of hope that we are doing good for our families.
Oh, that's so wonderful. Yeah, well, I think you've succeeded in that regard. You're a wonderful role model for your children, I'm sure that, and many others. Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that, so many mothers, when you have the opportunity to see your kids engaging with what you're doing, to kind of give them a taste of that and have that actually connect with them on a meaningful level, it's so rewarding.
My daughter, she used to pull things out of my garbage can. She's like, do you need this scrap anymore? And I'm like, no, you can have it. And she'd play with my scrap fabrics. And I think she was about 3 or 4 where she learned what fabric and paper scissors are. She learned, don't use the fabric scissors on paper.
That's early for that.
It is, yes. She was very good about it. So for this last Christmas, I made her own bin of fabric and supplies and scissors, and it was my favorite Christmas shopping I could have done.
Oh, no way.
But yeah, just to see the joy that it brings, and I think providing those opportunities for the youth, whether or not that's what she does in her life, that's okay, but just to see the joy that it brings somebody.
she's honing the skills, whether she uses them as a career or not.
Yeah.
What do you hope that young Indigenous creatives, maybe a little older than your daughter, or anyone imagining a creative life might take from your journey?
I always just tell people to pursue what you love to do, whether that is beading or painting or being creative or not being creative. Do what makes you happy, and don't trying to ignore the pressures of society. Because if somebody at some point as a youth told me, you're a really good artist, do you realize what you're doing is art? I think that could have been a different trajectory for me to realize, oh, okay, regalia can be art. And I think it would have brought a different mentality to my work. And I'm so thankful that I ended up here. But I do think that if you take a risk and you just pursue what it is that makes you happy, and you do so in a good way, then it'll lead you places that I think you can't even imagine. That's what I say. I always say, fashion's a dream come true that I didn't even know I had. I couldn't have imagined that I would end up in the places and spaces that I have been. Yeah.
Well, I don't think that I can add anything more to that. That was beautifully put. Thank you, Rebecca. I'd love to invite anyone to ask Rebecca any questions or comments or thoughts on anything she said. We do have some time before we need to wrap, so yeah, we have about, we could probably do about 5 or 10 minutes. Hi.
Thank you for this. I wonder if you've done any designs for men?
Yes. I've done a suit and a suit vest, some wool coats, some button shirts. My husband always needs something nice to wear, so he's a lawyer, and he works with, I don't know if you're familiar with Robert Davidson, but his wife, Terry Lynn, and she's always so fantastically dressed, and she always jokes, I'm always the best one dressed, and I think you're the second. So it's my life goal to get him the best dressed.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I feel like you redefined that word, and while incorporating the importance of your identity, culture, make it more authentic as well. Mm-hmm. And as you say, as an artist, which, because then it really does become an art form what you're doing versus fashion, which we usually associate with fast fashion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. That means a lot. And I think putting kind of terms on what we do is always a little bit tricky. Like I said, I don't even know if I fully feel like I'm an artist or a fashion designer, or maybe what I do is a little bit more in the art world, or maybe it is fashion. I'm not quite sure, but I think defining what it is that we do based on who we are is really the best way to go. It's not, I don't follow the trends or what we see on the mainstream runways. I think it's just creating work that really resonates with us, with me, and what reflects, my experiences in the world. Thank you for that comment.
How do you reconcile the traditionalist part of the regalia, the old traditions, and then bringing it into the newer contemporary realm? Is there any danger of losing, especially with the young people who might be more excited about the more contemporary aspect of the traditional motifs and things?
Mm-hmm. I think that's always something that I've kept at the forefront of the decisions that I make in fashion, of what is kind of our traditional way and what is the more contemporary, and how do those come together, but also at what point do I have to keep something in the traditional world only and not in the contemporary world. And I think having those conversations with my mentors, with my family, bringing my work back to community. So I recently did a show in Port Hardy, which is where I'm from, and having people have the opportunity to comment on it or to guide me, just as a form of being accountable to community where the art form comes from. I don't think there's necessarily a danger in forgetting, because if you're learning how to draw any kind of art form, it stems from what we call form line art, which is what you see a lot in our paintings. And in order, even if you want to contemporize it, you need to know the history of it. You need to know how to do a proper ovoid. How do the different elements come together? And if you're wanting to do even, an eagle, there's specific ways to do eagles. There's specific things that are added to it that make it more of a supernatural being than just a straight eagle. And I think it's through those relationships of learning that you learn those histories. And even if you only want to take, say an ovoid or a salmon head and make it into a fully contemporary thing, you still need to know the history. And I think the same could be said about, the Chilkat designs that I use. There's a very specific lineage and history to it all, and relationships. And I think that is what is exciting about fashion, is that you can express yourself the way that you want to do so, and you can create things that you want to create. But in that process, you still learn the history. Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting what you were saying earlier about the ovoid shape and how, or sort of the form line, and how someone could spend their entire life just trying to get it perfect. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful way to spend your life, mm-hmm. to continue that practice. It's very meditative. It's very connected to something greater than oneself. I feel like it's a beautiful metaphor, actually. Mm-hmm. Once again, thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming and joining us today for this series and sharing your thoughts with us and your work, and walking us through your beautiful designs. Thank you, everyone, for coming and joining us and for the thoughtful questions. Thank you all again for coming.
I have one last thought, sorry.
No, please.
If you are around in November is when Vancouver Indigenous Fashion Week is. It's about 4 days. I think it's like November 20th-ish at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, and it's just absolutely amazing place to come. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, brilliant announcement. Mark your calendars, please. Mm-hmm. I will be there. Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.